I used to believe marriage was a promise, not just of love, but of safety. So when I stood beside David at the altar, hands trembling with joy and nerves, I truly thought I was stepping into my forever. The way he looked at me, the way everyone kept saying, "You two are perfect," it wrapped around me like this warm, reassuring glow. Even when our plane lifted off for the honeymoon, I still felt like I was floating. We laughed so much, we kissed under golden skies. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the life I dreamed of. Then his phone lit up on the nightstand. He was in the shower, humming something out of tune, completely unaware. I wasn't looking for anything. Truly, I wasn't. But the message preview was impossible to ignore. It wasn't from a friend or a colleague. It was flirty, intimate. The kind of message a wife shouldn't have to see. I stared at the screen, heart sinking into a tight knot I couldn't untangle. My breath caught, shallow and sharp. I picked up the phone. My fingers trembled, but I tapped it open anyway. Curiosity? Instinct? Maybe both. I wish I could say it was just that one message, but it wasn't. There were photos, chats, proof. The affair hadn't ended. It had followed us, right into our honeymoon suite. Time slowed down. The air felt heavy, like the walls themselves knew and didn't know how to hold the weight. I sat there frozen, his phone still glowing in my hand, while the sound of water echoed from the bathroom. My face didn't move. No tears, no gasps, just silence. There was something surreal about it, like watching a life unravel in slow motion. The kind of betrayal that doesn't scream. It just settles into your bones. My mind raced, but my body stayed still. I thought about every vow he made, every word he whispered during the ceremony, and how empty they felt now. It wasn't just the cheating, it was the timing. The cruelty of smiling at me with lips that had kissed someone else hours before. The sheer ease with which he lived a lie. That hurt more than the act itself. I wondered for a second if he ever meant a word of it. And still, I didn't break. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just looked at myself in the mirror and asked, what now? I could have confronted him, demanded answers, created a scene right there. But something deeper, quieter, took hold. A part of me I didn't know existed, calm, measured, almost surgical. That part walked me to the desk, pulled out hotel stationery, and picked up a pen. The first words came slower than I expected. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew too much. "You made your choice," I wrote, my hand steady, my pulse anything but. "Now I'll make mine." I didn't pour emotion onto the page. No accusations, no begging, just facts, just finality. It wasn't about hurting him. It was about freeing me. I placed the letter back on the desk for a moment, rereading each line, making sure it said exactly what it needed to. I took off my ring, the one that had meant everything just days ago, and set it on top of the folded paper. It didn't feel like I was giving something up. It felt like I was taking something back. My voice, my peace, my future. One he didn't deserve to be part of. When the water turned off and I heard him moving around, I didn't panic. I slid the phone back exactly where it had been, sat down calmly, pretended nothing had happened, but inside, something had shifted, something had sharpened. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't cry. I'd already started writing, not just a letter, but the beginning of my own ending. I woke up before the sun. The room was quiet, too quiet for what it held. David was still asleep, tangled in the sheets, his face peaceful in a way that felt almost cruel. I got up slowly, careful not to make a sound. Every move felt deliberate. I'd already decided. There would be no confrontation, no dramatic scene, just a clean break, a quiet escape. I slipped the letter into the hotel safe, just beneath his name, placed the ring on top like a period at the end of a sentence. It was almost poetic, the way I walked away without slamming a door, without saying a word. I wanted him to feel it not through anger, but through absence. That moment when you reach for something familiar and find nothing there. That's the kind of silence that echoes. I booked the earliest flight I could find, 1 seat, no return. The airport felt like a different planet, bustling, busy, alive. It was strange being surrounded by so many people while quietly erasing one. I kept waiting for the weight of it to hit me, for the sadness or the panic, but it didn't come. Not yet. There was only this calm, cold, clear, and certain. As I waited at the gate, I glanced around at the couples holding hands, sharing coffee, talking about their plans, and for a moment I wondered if any of them were pretending too, if anyone else had smiled through betrayal, just to get through breakfast. I wasn't angry, not in the way you'd expect. What I felt was more hollow, like something had been scooped out and quietly carried away, not broken, just gone. The flight boarded, and I found my seat near the window. I watched the world shrink beneath me as the plane ascended, and I let it. I didn't check my phone, didn't refresh anything. I didn't want to see his name light up on the screen, because nothing he could say would matter now. Words had failed him, truth had failed us, and I had nothing left to offer him, not even goodbye. By the time the plane leveled out, I realized I hadn't cried, not a single tear. I stared out at the clouds and whispered to myself, keep going. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was survival. I was leaving behind more than a man. I was leaving behind the version of me who accepted less, who made herself smaller just to keep someone else comfortable. That woman stayed behind in that hotel room. I landed hours later in a city that didn't know my name, and I liked it that way. No familiar streets, no shared memories hiding in every corner, just space, room to breathe. I took a cab to a modest hotel, checked in under my maiden name, and slept for 12 straight hours. When I woke up, the first thing I felt was hunger. Not sadness. Hunger. For something new. Something mine. I never answered his calls. Never replied to his texts. I imagined the moment he opened the safe. How his face must have looked, reading those words in my handwriting. I pictured the silence. The weight of it sinking in. That was the closure I chose. Not a fight, not a tearful goodbye, just the truth left behind in a locked box he'd eventually have to open. And by then, I'd already be rewriting my story. I wasn't running away. I was moving forward, deliberately, powerfully, and on my own terms. That part was important to me. I didn't want him to remember a woman who shattered. I wanted him to remember a woman who walked away whole. And so I did. By the time he opened the safe, I was already building a life without him. Starting over wasn't glamorous. It was messy, quiet, and slow. I got a tiny apartment with peeling paint and thin walls, but it was mine. I found a job at a small marketing firm, nothing fancy, just a fresh start. I kept my head down, worked hard, and built a routine. Coffee in the mornings, long walks after work, books stacked beside my bed. For the first time in years, I had space to hear myself think. I didn't talk about David. Not to coworkers, not to neighbors, not even to myself, really. The past became something I folded away, not erased, but no longer invited to the table. Instead, I poured myself into learning. Business courses, networking events, late-night YouTube tutorials on how to launch your own brand. There was power in progress, power in deciding who I wanted to become, instead of being defined by who I'd been with. And slowly, things shifted. I built a small consulting business out of my apartment. Clients came in one by one, women mostly. Women with stories, women like me. I helped them craft their voices, design their brands, believe in what they had to offer. In helping them, I was healing myself. Reinvention wasn't some sudden makeover. It was steady, intentional. Brick by brick, I was building a new foundation. Eventually, I started saying yes again. To dinners, to conversations that went past small talk, to glances that lingered just a little longer. It was cautious at first. Every new connection felt like stepping onto thin ice. But I wasn't looking for magic. I was looking for honesty, for kindness. And then one afternoon at a professional conference, I met Liam. He didn't try too hard. He didn't lead with charm. He listened. We talked for hours. About work, sure, but also about life. Books, music, regret, hope. He had this grounded energy, like he'd lived enough to know what mattered and what didn't. I didn't ask his last name. It didn't even occur to me. I wasn't looking for complications. I was just enjoying the comfort of being seen, not sized up. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't in years, not because he was funny, but because he was real. Weeks passed and we kept talking. Long calls, weekend coffees, walks that turned into dinners. There was no rush, no pressure, just presence. I found myself smiling at my phone again. Not out of habit, out of genuine connection. And slowly, without even noticing, I began to let my guard down. Not completely, but enough to feel something I hadn't dared to in a long time. Safe. I learned his last name by accident. We were filling out paperwork for a joint seminar we'd agreed to speak at. I glanced down at the form, and there it was. Liam Whitaker. My stomach dropped. My hands went cold. I stared at the name like it had punched the air out of me. I knew it. Of course I knew it. And yet, in all our time together, it had never come up. He was David's younger brother. I excused myself and sat in my car for an hour, trying to breathe. The irony was cruel, painful, almost cinematic. But here's the thing. I wasn't the same woman anymore. I didn't fall apart. I didn't spiral. I didn't even text him right away. I just sat with it. And when I finally told him the truth, expecting the worst, he just listened. No defensiveness, no blame, just honesty meeting honesty. Liam knew his brother had made mistakes, but he didn't know the details. Until I told him. And when I did, something in his eyes changed. Not his feelings for me, but his understanding of why I carried myself the way I did. He didn't run. He didn't flinch. He reached for my hand and said, "You've been through hell. Let's build something that feels like home." And that's when I knew. I had once married a man who broke me. Now I was marrying a man who helped me feel whole. The morning of my wedding felt different. Not rushed, not chaotic. Just still. Peaceful, in a way I hadn't felt on my first one. My dress hung near the window, bathed in soft sunlight, and I took my time getting ready. No nerves, just quiet gratitude. Liam didn't complete me. I was already whole. But he saw me, stood beside me, and that mattered more than I could explain. This wasn't a second chance at love. It was my first shot at something real. Guests started to arrive, smiles, hugs, the usual chatter. I stood behind the chapel doors, bouquet in hand, listening to the faint music start. One step at a time, I told myself. This time, I would walk for me. And as the doors opened and the guests rose, I felt that calm again. My heart beat fast, sure, but not from fear. From purpose. From finally choosing a future that I wasn't just part of, but proud of. And then halfway down the aisle, I saw him. David, sitting in the front row like a ghost that had clawed its way into my peace. His eyes widened, jaw clenched, color draining from his face as realization hit. He didn't just see me alive. He saw me thriving, radiant, in love, with his brother. For a second, I thought my knees might buckle, but instead, I lifted my chin. I kept walking. The ceremony went on, but I could feel his stare like static against my skin. He didn't speak. He didn't move, just sat there, watching as I said the vows he once twisted, now spoken with truth. Liam's hands held mine, steady, warm, unshaken. In his eyes there was no confusion, no hesitation, just love. And right then, I knew. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a reclamation of dignity, of voice, of peace. We said, "I do." The crowd clapped. I remember turning to face the guests, catching one last glimpse of David. He looked smaller somehow. Like the weight of his own lies had finally settled on his shoulders. He couldn't undo the past, and he couldn't pretend I was someone he still understood. I wasn't the woman he left behind. I was the woman who rose without him, the one he never thought would. After the ceremony, he approached. Of course he did. I knew that look. Desperate, stunned, grasping at something already gone. "Elena," he said, barely above a whisper. I turned to him, calm and clear, and met his eyes. "Strange, isn't it?" I said. "You lost me with a lie. He found me with truth." He blinked, like the words had cut deeper than he expected, but I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. He just stood there, mouth slightly open, trying to gather words that wouldn't come. Maybe he thought this moment would end differently, that I'd fall into old patterns, offer him closure he hadn't earned. But I wasn't there to soothe his conscience. I was there to marry the man who showed me what it meant to be loved without conditions, without masks. Liam was already at my side, protective without being possessive. David looked at him, then back at me, like he was doing the math of everything he'd lost. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I didn't need to. The silence between us said enough. It was the sound of someone realizing too late that you can't fix what you destroyed with your own hands. He once had me forever. And he lost me without a fight. That was the part that haunted him. Not the wedding, not the ring. The fact that I walked away and never looked back. We turned, hand in hand, and left him there, surrounded by flowers and smiles that weren't his anymore. I didn't feel anger or pity, just a finality that settled deep in my chest, like the click of a locked door. And as we stepped out into the sunlight, I could almost hear my past shutting behind me, not with a bang, but with quiet, graceful certainty. The kind you don't question, the kind that never reopens. It didn't take long. David tried reaching out to Liam the very next day, called him, texted, even showed up at his apartment unannounced. I knew he would. Men like him don't handle being left behind, especially not by someone they thought would stay broken. But what he didn't know, what he never understood, was that I had already told Liam everything. From the beginning. The betrayal. The letter. The safe. All of it. Liam didn't flinch when I told him. He didn't get angry or insecure or ask me to hide it. He just said, "Thank you for trusting me." That's who he is. Grounded, honest, protective. So when David tried to twist the story, when he showed up with all his charm turned desperation, Liam shut it down before it even started. "You broke her," he told him, voice calm but firm. "I won't let you near what's whole now." There was no shouting, no dramatic scene, just a boundary, clear and final. David didn't understand how we got here. How the woman he once dismissed was now stronger, steadier, loved by the brother who saw her worth. But this wasn't about rivalry. It wasn't revenge. It was reality. And in that reality, I was no longer his echo. I was someone else's future. One he had no power to disrupt. We didn't argue with David. We didn't explain ourselves. There was nothing left to explain. The past had already spoken. In choices, in silence, in a ring left behind in a safe. Liam and I focused on us. On the life we were building, not the one that tried to unravel me. We packed our bags a week later for the honeymoon. Same white sands, same ocean view. But this time, everything felt different. It was mine now. Landing on that island again, I half expected ghosts to greet me. But there weren't any. Just the warm breeze, the soft scent of salt in the air, and the feeling of a chapter being rewritten, on my own terms. We checked into a different hotel, far from the one that held memories I no longer needed. I looked out at the waves, and for the first time, I didn't feel haunted. I felt free. Entirely, fiercely free. Liam watched me closely, not with concern, but with reverence. He knew what this place meant, what it had once stolen, and what I was reclaiming now. I took off my shoes, walked barefoot across the sand, and let the water touch my feet. The same ocean, a different woman. That was the difference. I had come back, not as the abandoned, but as the author of her own ending. On our last night, we had dinner by the shore. Candlelight flickered in the breeze, waves lapping softly in the background. I wore a simple dress, no need for anything extravagant, just honesty and comfort, the way love should feel. Liam reached across the table, touched my hand, and smiled like I was the beginning of every good thing. And I realized right then that peace doesn't come from payback. It comes from choosing yourself, fully and without apology. I thought about everything it took to get here. The silence, the rebuilding, the loneliness that used to curl up beside me at night. I'd carried so much, and for so long, that I didn't even notice when it got lighter. But sitting across from him, with a new ring on my finger and laughter rising easily in my chest, I understood. This wasn't revenge. This was redemption. Not loud, just real. I didn't need to make David regret losing me. Life did that for me. All I needed was a second chance, not at love, but at peace, at truth, at finally being in a story that didn't ask me to shrink. And as we toasted to our future, I looked out at the ocean one last time and smiled. Because this time, the island didn't carry pain. It carried promise. I didn't need revenge, just a second chance, with the right man in the right story.